Hi students, welcome back to our last presentation in this series. As you learned in the previous presentation, the 1954 Supreme Court decision of Brown versus Board of Education did not immediately lead to the desegregation of schools in the United States. Integration had to be forced. A test of the Supreme Court decision took place at Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas in 1957, 3 years after the Brown versus Board of Education decision. 9 black students were chosen to integrate the all-white high school. They became known as the Little Rock Nine. One of them was the author of our book, Warriors Don't Cry. Her name is Melba Patillo Beals, and her book is about her experience during that first year of integration. The Little Rock Nine faced a great deal of resistance to integration, so much so that the President of the United States, Dwight Eisenhower, had to send in federal troops to protect the students as they went to class. A nonviolent struggle for more civil rights and integration continued in the decades that followed. Young protesters conducted sit-ins in restaurants during which they refused to move to the black sections of a restaurant. They were often arrested and beaten. Eventually, many restaurants agreed to desegregate. The same resistance also happened on bus rides called Freedom Rides, in which both black and white passengers would ride buses into states where segregation was the law in order to challenge segregation. They also faced arrest and violence. Marches and protests were conducted in cities in the South to challenge segregation and voting restrictions. Some of the more well-known protests and marches included the Birmingham Campaign, which you will read about in this class, the March from Selma, and the March on Washington, at which Martin Luther King gave his famous speech, "I Have a Dream." In 1964, the Voting Rights Act was signed by President Johnson, eliminating restrictions on voting. This led to another effort called Freedom Summer in 1964, during which young people volunteered to register more African Americans to vote. Many often want to think that such civil rights efforts are no longer needed or are over. However, nothing could be further from the truth. Racism rarely ends, it just changes forms. Today, we struggle with segregation in other ways. Due to a practice called redlining, housing policies often restricted people of color from moving into certain neighborhoods. It is possible to see the effects of this redlining even today, even in our own city of Modesto. One can also see that racism has impacted the rate of imprisonment of certain groups of people more than other groups. This has become known as mass incarceration, and we will be reading more about this in our course as well. Almost every major element of society is impacted by racism in our country. Law enforcement typically applies more policing efforts to communities of color, resulting in more arrests, leading to more imprisonment of certain groups, and leading to more police killings of African American men in particular. Such killings have started movements such as the Black Lives Matter movement to help bring attention to such injustices. There continue to be disparities or negative differences due to a history of racism against certain groups in areas of education in which graduation rates for Black and Latinx students are lower and discipline more severe, as well as in employment. These disparities must be examined and solutions discussed. As members of U.S. American society, it is important for you to be aware of the history of this country and your own role in getting involved in matters that affect the lives of those most impacted by unjust practices. And within our own personal lives, we must daily consider the various ways in which we as individuals may exclude or include others and open up or close opportunities for others. So I hope you'll join that journey with me, and I'm looking forward to talking with you more.